What is up, everyone? My name is Adam with the Lavin Real Estate Group and Next Home Synergy, and I am here today to give you a little heads up and a couple tips on things to look for when you're purchasing your home, or even if you live in your home now and you're just trying to troubleshoot a problem. And that is to make sure that you are not going to buy a house that floods and/or gets water into their basement. It is the worst thing in the world when you find the perfect home and then 2, 3, 4 months into living in it after the first big snowstorm or rainstorm, all of a sudden you realize that your days and nights are spent worrying about whether or not you're going to wake up to a flood in your house. Now the big thing to realize is that just because you're not in a floodplain per se doesn't mean that you're not going to experience this issue. There are a couple things to look out for that if you're not with somebody that's experienced and can point them out to you, or you yourself aren't aware of them and looking out for them, can become a huge problem. So there are actually 5 things that I'm going to tell you about today. They're all a little bit different, but they all ultimately pertain to making sure that up front that as much water stays out of your house as humanly possible and avoids any damage possibly to your house. So the first one is the grading of your yard. Now, what does that mean? So that essentially means the way that your yard is sloped and slanted, and any valleys or little crevices that have been naturally formed or man-made formed into your yard that was either put there to help remediate any water issues, or are naturally occurring and can be a potential problem. So just because you live on a hill or something like that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a problem if we know what to look for and we know that everything's done properly. And the other thing is to also look at the natural land around you, your neighbors, any forest area that might be around you. But essentially, what you need to do is, if you're not out on a rainy day, which most people don't go to look at for houses on a rainy day, is to kind of look at the land around the house and try to envision, which path this water is going to take. And in Delaware and Chester County that we live in, it naturally rains quite a bit when it does rain, and it also tends to snow quite a bit. So anytime that we have, a water issue, that's naturally coming down, we need to make sure that it's going away from the house and not for some reason into your house. Now, sometimes people that have purchased a house and never really did anything or thought about it didn't have that house or didn't have any issues while they lived in that house. However, because the land naturally changes over time, it is something to look out for that can become a problem during the next land, era of ownership, just because it hasn't been thought of because there wasn't a problem. Now there are things that go into that. The biggest one is obviously the slants that go into or away from your house, on your land and then your neighbor's land. And then also the what the ground is made out of and how high the water table is. Super detailed to get into, and it's totally a case-by-case scenario, but you definitely want to make sure that you're either aware of everything to look for, or you're with somebody that at least has a pretty good idea of what to look for. And ultimately, if it could become an issue, there are experts out there that I do work with that could come in and kind of take a more in-depth look at things and find out what we can do to solve the issue if it's a path that you wanted to solve. The next thing to think about is looking up at the roof, the gutter system, the flashing that is around the house, as well as any splash guards that exist. Now, obviously the biggest thing is the roof, and making sure that the roof is pitched properly, that any additions that were put on were done with the idea of keeping the water away and going away from the house, and then that the gutter system has been A, installed properly, and then B, kept up with well, and C, that it actually exists in the parts that it needs to exist. I've definitely walked into houses where there's like gutters on one side of the house and then for some reason not on the other side of the house. So one area looks great, and then all of a sudden we find problems in the other area. These things, obviously the roof, the flashing, things like that not being installed properly we could have a flooding issue from the roof or a slow breakdown of the roof, or possibly a chimney or any other pipes that are exiting from the roof area. That can become a problem, but the back end secondary problem on that is that it can create a pooling issue around your house if those aren't installed or kept up with properly. Now again, it's another deal where if you don't know what to look for, you definitely want to work with somebody that at least has an eye as to what's right, what's wrong, and then if there is something wrong, what expert to go to past that. Now, obviously we don't want your roof to leak, but on the opposite end, we don't want pooling issues either, because that can break down the foundation to your house or also cause an issue with water actually entering into your house that, all the proper grading in the world isn't going to fix. Number 3 is water remediation in the yard and around the house. Now, there are scenarios where there's nothing you can do. If you build the house in a great scenic spot and it happens to be on a hill, okay, but we have to realize the fact that water is going to come down from the sky and run down the hill, right? So there are remediation tactics that we can do, and we want to make sure that they're in place in that type of scenario. The most common and easiest one is things like gravel and pebbles or rock, either in the yard, around the yard, to kind of help guide it back out to the road or just away from the house in general, because we know that's not going to move as much as the land naturally moving. There's also drainage systems such as French drains, as well as underground reservoir systems and pump systems that can actually hold the water, and if it's legal in the area, pump it into another area or just away from the house, or hold on to the water and allow it to naturally evaporate, or flow into different types of underground soil that's a little bit more absorbent if it's not an overabundance of water. The other thing is any remediation around the house. Often that's done with a mixture of sand, pebble, and stone, sometimes rock as well, that can actually help absorb the water if there's any pooling around the house a little bit easier. Or another, again, more remediation systems that involve pumping the water either into your gutters or just in general away from the house or into another underground reservoir tank. When those need to be installed, again, is kind of on a case-by-case scenario, but it's something to look out for. If they exist, are they installed properly? Or if it looks like it used to exist at some point or maybe need to, exist, is it an option? And, is it going to keep your house safe or your potential house safe? Number 4 are 2 big things that people they see and they don't think of. And it can become a huge issue over time, and those are window wells that create windows down into an underground basement or a partial underground basement, and then DELCO doors and stairwells. So DELCO doors are those old doors that go over the stairwell that would go down into your house. And if you are anything like me, probably the most common use for them is like, when you were a little kid, you used to jump on them and pop off or put on a play on top of them or something like that. The issue is that that's usually the most common use, and they kind of break down over time, either from people putting things on top of them or just the natural flow of water and ice and everything like that breaks down the integrity of that door. But what happens is that, it's a basement door, nobody really pays attention to it, and vice versa with the window wells. It's a window, nobody really pays attention to it. You go out and pull some weeds around there a couple times a year, and that's all you really think about it. There are materials that go into each of those and water remediation systems that can exist to make sure that no water is either A, pooling, or B, actually entering into the house or creating an issue where it's actually forcing itself into the foundation of the home. Now, one big thing to realize is that when this is occurring, just because when you're looking at the home, if there hasn't been any water penetration during the previous homeowner's ownership, doesn't mean that it's not going to become a problem. And the reason why is that most foundations, particularly in our counties, are a little bit older. And they're created out of porous materials, and the way those things worked was that they're put there to absorb the water as opposed to just absorbing all the pressure. And then, you know, it absorbs so much water and then pushes it out, absorbs so much water and then pushes it out. The issue is over time, it can only absorb so much water, particularly if it's just getting a constant flow and there's not proper remediation. And then over time, that water can actually push through your foundation and then create issues of not only moisture in your house or actual physical water entering your basement or crawl space or house, but then also, it can create mold on the actual wall, or that gets into the air, and that's just like a whole nother issue that we really don't want to, get into or expose you or your family to. And then the last thing, number 5, and I bring this up because in Delaware County and Chester County, particularly in a lot of your farm areas, a lot of these houses are older, and water entering the basement is just something that we have to live with. It is how it is. The water table is high, the pitch is a certain way, there's a lot of natural water that comes through the area. And so as opposed to saying, well, we're going to do everything we can to keep the water out, that's true. There are scenarios where there's just nothing you can do, and you kind of have to live with the fact that this is how it is. That being said, you want to work with somebody that can point out things as to whether or not the inside of the house has actually been kept up with, particularly in the basement, to make sure that whatever water does get in can get out easily. So the biggest thing that you want to look at first is to make sure that the basement floor is properly pitched, and what that means is that there's a canal system built in where need be, as well as the actual grade of the floor to flow to a lowest point, and that there's no uneven points that are going to create a pooling of water, because what that does is then create natural moisture, sitting water, which turns into humidity and which can turn into potentially mold, which is, obviously extremely hazardous for the material of the house, but also your health. And then we want to look at other options, such as sump pumps and French drains. Now, a sump pump is generally found at the lowest point of your house. Some people are freaked out by them, but they just need to be there to make sure that it maintains the integrity of the home. And what they do is essentially collect water and then pump it out of your house. And then in a scenario where, if you are in an area that is susceptible to flooding, if the house did flood for some reason, it's going to get it out of your house, as opposed to you having a basement full of water and going, oh my God, what are we going to do with this? I guess we're going to bucket it out, right? Not the best option. And then the other part is, the next level to all that is a French drainage system, which is can be installed differently in different homes, but essentially it's kind of like a perforated pipe that goes along the sides of your basement walls and in certain areas that more or less guide and channel water and create an underground system of a mix of either pipe and or soil, and that can actually funnel any water that consistently gets into the home due to ground pressure or just water entering for some reason, either out of the home or into the sump pump where it can be removed from the home. So those are all things that we really need to look out for. If you have any questions about any of them, if you're in a home currently and you're like, oh my God, what do I do? Or if you're starting the process of looking at houses and you're like, man, I really want to make sure, all these issues are taken care of up front and not something that catches us off guard down the road, I'd love to be able to help you out, get a chance to talk to you. So feel free to give me a call, or you can text me. My number is 610-442-9371, or you can email me at the bottom here. Thank you so much for listening today, and have a great day.